Hello, this is Michael Beers, West Coast editor for Jam Magazine, and I'm here with the multi-talented Simon Phillips, drummer, composer, producer, and audio engineer. Simon, thank you for the interview, and how are you today, sir?
I'm fine.
Great. Well, here's get started. Let's talk about the present and the future. Right now, with Protocol 5, you guys, this nucleus has been together for 3, 4 years. And next week will mark the second year anniversary of the release of the Protocol 5 album. The question what people are wanting to know, when will the next album be coming out, or will there be a next Protocol album? And would it be Protocol 5 Part 2, or will it be encompassing new musicians? And will there be a tour to go alongside with said next album coming out?
I just haven't had any time to devote to my to new music, writing new music, because I've been involved with so many other productions, which I'm involved as a writer as well as producer and an engineer sometimes and player sometimes. So I just haven't had a chance to do it. But also, I need to take a little bit of time between projects because I just don't want to repeat myself. Because the music is, you get into a way of writing and then it becomes kind of a formula a little bit. And I don't want to just do a revamp of Protocol 5. Protocol 5 is very different to Protocol 4. To my ears, maybe to people that don't know Fusion might sound exactly the same, I don't know. But to me, it was very different. And that's not just the sound of the band, because now it's a 5-piece with a horn player. It's also the compositions themselves were really quite different. So I actually have to let a bit of time pass before I start on the writing trail. But I have a feeling I'm probably going to write more this year.
Great. Okay, speaking of producing, you've been on record. You started producing when you started working with Mike Oldfield. I believe it was the Crisis album,
Yeah.
and then you produced, quite a few after that, and full-time producer as well. But the fact is, before Mike Oldfield, you worked with some extraordinary producers. I think of
Yeah.
Ken Scott with There and Back with Jeff Beck.
Yeah.
Additionally, Frank Zappa, aka Stucco Holmes, for El Shankar's
Yeah.
Touch Me There.
Right.
And then
right.
also you did 2 albums with Roger Glover. You did Judas Priest, Sin After Sin, as well as the MSG, Michael Shankar Group, the first album.
Well,
So-
and David Coverdale, Whitesnake.
Okay, there you go too. Thank you so much
Yeah.
for reminding me. Right.
Yeah.
So my question is this though: aside from what you learned from Mike Oldfield, were you able to assimilate maybe through osmosis subtle nuances of being a producer from working with those people that helped contributed to you being such an effective producer?
Actually, every session I did was a learning curve. I mean, early on, I started doing sessions with my dad in 1971. I was really young, but that was a very specific type of music which I knew quite well. And apart from new charts he'd bring out, I pretty much knew what the music was going to be. But in 1973 was when I started actually being booked for a session and turning up not knowing what I was going to play, or whether it be a chart or whether it be, And they started off as small sessions with unknown producers. But as I was 16 at the time, all of them were way more experienced than I was. So I was in a learning position the whole time. I got to work with some great producers who totally unknown to certainly the American public. But they were either producers of some pop artists, like used to do a lot of sessions for Dave Mackay, Andy Mackay, Dave Mackay. I think it was Dave Mackay, who produced Bonnie Tyler, for example, way before Jim Steinman got hold of her. And all sorts of different types of music and different types of producers. Colin Thurston, who produced Human League, worked with him on various projects. So all that time I was gaining experience. But you see, I loved it. I grew up in the studio. I was dragged around the London studios by my dad. And so the environment to me it's home. I feel most comfortable actually in a studio.
Great. I mentioned the album Sin After Sin by Judas Priest. That was sort of like a milestone moment in rock as far as you using the double bass drums? Because prior to that, I mean, back in the early 70s, there's just a handful of drummers that used double bass drums.
Yeah.
And anyway, then you started doing that. So my question is, at what age did you start using your double bass drums? And also, when you were using them, were you a specific genre of music? Were you thinking, well, this will go good with jazz, or this will go good with rock? Did you have a certain type of music? So how did it come about with your double bass?
I was 17, 1974. I bought a second bass drum to go with my midnight blue Heyman kit. I'll tell you what it was. I was always fascinated by it. I was always fascinated by reading the Ludwig catalog or Slingerland catalog or whatever it be, Heyman catalog, Premiere. I always thought, God, what is that like? And I saw a few people play double bass drum on various TV shows, but it wasn't what I thought it should be until I watched an All Grey Whistle Test, which was a wonderful program back in England, in BBC Two, I think it was. And I saw Black Oak, Arkansas, and Tommy Aldridge playing these two 26-inch Ludwig bass drums. Well, I think they were 20. They looked huge. I was watching television, and that was the first time I went, yes, that's how they should sound, because he was so even. Every foot was even. The gaps between the 16th notes were even, and that's when I said, I've got to do this.
Great.
But I never thought of a style of music. No, not at all. I just would, depending on the session, if it were what I call the straight sessions, which was like 3-hour sessions, 10 to 1 at Air Studio 2, 2 to 5 at CBS, and then maybe 7 till 10 sometimes. Then I would probably use my single Ludwig kit at the time. But then I started doing more of the rock and roll sessions where we had a lot more time. I brought my double kit in. Even if I didn't use the second kick drum, it didn't really matter to me. And I would use it how and when I felt it was appropriate. That's really kind of how it was.
Other album I was going to ask you about was There and Back with Jeff Beck. The first half of the album, Jan Hammer wrote all the tracks, but the other half, you and Tony Hymas wrote the tracks, and most notably, you had like The Pump, El Becco, and Space Boogie, which live were some of the highlights of that tour.
Yeah.
Was this the first opportunity you had to showcase your writing skills, to show that you could write, and also, did you and Tony, working with Jack Bruce together, were these ideas that you had formulated and maybe applied with Jeff Beck, or you just pulled them out, just made them out of scratch, just pulled them out of the hat?
I had been starting to play a bit of piano and starting to write things from, I'd say 74 probably. But unfortunately, I never went to school. I never went to music school, because in London at that time, we didn't have any. We just had the Royal College of Music. There were no jazz schools, there were no rock and roll schools. And the other thing was, I was already working. And the thought of stopping work and then going to Berkeley, I didn't even know about Berkeley, by the way, at that time. It was 1974, 75. My schooling was actually practical schooling, because I turn up to a session and play with the people I'm playing with, and that's how I learned how to do this. So sadly, the downside is that I have no idea of music theory at all. It's all ear. I do it all by ear. I don't even know what key I'm writing in. I don't really care, actually. I'll let those guys, I'm the drummer, musicians. Musicians are very good at doing that. And also, it was funny because the people that I was playing with a lot, like Ray Russell, who I was in a band with, we did lots of sessions together, and Tony, they were my two main guiding lights. They just said, just do it. Don't worry about it, just do it. Especially Ray, he said, no, it's wonderful that you actually don't have the confines of this education of music. And I feel I lost out a lot, but anyway, I started doing that, but it was really when we got to Jeff's album that I thought, we need material. And I also had what I thought I had a real kinship for what Jeff needed, because I knew that he didn't like anything too jazzy, but he loved what I call adult chords. He loved jazz harmony, but he wanted it to be very melodic and still rock and roll. And I think that's what a lot of people don't quite understand about him. There's this thing about, he really wasn't a jazz guy at all, but he had the ears and the technique to play over any of those changes. It was amazing. So, and Jan probably was the closest person in terms of getting more. Had a heavier rock side to him, because that's what he wanted to do. He always wanted to be a rock and roll musician. Tony Williams too. Actually, he always wanted to play in a rock band. And his last drum kit had 2 bass drums. Don't know if you know that. So that was where it started, and I said to Tony, let's get together. And so he's I'm not going to mess around with harmony. He's got all the harmony because he's got all the chops.
Yeah.
But what I did was more melody and concept. I came up with the concepts of each of those songs.
Yeah.
I might have a little bass riff that I had, which on El Becco, that started there actually. Tony wrote the whole beginning. He'd already had that, and he played it to me, and I went, great, that's going to go great into the do 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 do. I was just do 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 bling bling do do. I was trying to do a Stanley Clarke thing, and he picked that up, and that's how that came to be. The Pump was based on I'm a Walrus, Beatles. And I said, Tony, here's the groove, and just one note, just pick a note, pick a key, and he picked B, so boom, 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 like this, and that's how that came about. And we both worked on the melody, and Space Boogie was an accident. We were jamming, Jeff, Tony, and I took a little drum kit down there, so it was a single kit. And we played some of these tunes through, and then had a break. And I got a bit bored, so I dragged over the bass drum from Jeff's kit. He had this little Premiere kit, and plonked it. And so I had 2 bass drums, and we just started playing like a quadrant 4 boogie, right? Mm-hmm. I just started turning it around by playing in 7 against the 4, and Jeff picked up on it and started playing in 7. And I went to Tony, there's our next song, and that's how it came out. But yes, you're right. That was really the first time I felt that's the music I want to write.
Was it a moment for you too, like I Have Arrived, where you had the confidence to, hey, I wrote some good songs? I mean, we had, as a writer, you knew then you could really put out some really good tunes.
I knew I had an awful long way to go to be able to write stuff on my own.
Okay.
That was still a long way off, because I had no training, so I had to just do it all by ear, and still do, but I now have had a lot of experience of doing it and made plenty of solo records. But it is frustrating not to have a good technique on keyboards. That would be nice. But with the help of a sequencer, that's not going to get any better. It's actually got worse. And without that knowledge, without that music theory, it's always going to take me a long time.
As a producer, you're talking about producing. Felix Pappalardi once said, as a producer, he's looking for quality, not quantity. Sort of a simplification. But for you, if you had your druthers, would you like to focus in producing like jazz fusion, or just whoever gives you what you think is the best project to work with at the time?
I can produce. I like to produce any style, because I basically played every style, being a session musician.
Right.
So, in fact, tomorrow we fly back to LA. I'm going to drive back to Ohio, and the very next day I'm going to start arranging tunes for a production which I start next week, which is a straight ahead rock song album. I mean, it's really simple. But I love it because it's that style. That's great. I know what to do. I know how they should sound. I pick the musicians for it. It really doesn't matter. I can go from producing a straight ahead bebop album to a heavy metal album, probably. But it's the style of production. Once I worked with this guy, who I'm going to mention in a minute, I went, that's the kind of producer I like and I want to be. And it took a while to get there, but Phil Ramone. And I worked with him before on a live concert, so I didn't really get to work with him so much. I mean, we met obviously, but he called me for this one album which we did in New York, and I just loved the way he produced. It was perfect. I also didn't know that he engineered some of my favorite albums way back, but it was lovely because what he did was he created a vibe, a place where you can be creative. He didn't have to say anything unless he needed to. It was great. It was absolutely lovely. And to me, I think that's the art of a producer, is to, you're not making your solo album. And a lot of producers think they are, using the artist's money. No, you're helping them get the best product for the budget that they've got and their talent and their music. So I love the way Phil produced. It was great.
And one last question I was going to ask you. Vinnie Colaiuta said the best piece of advice he ever got was from Frank Zappa when he just joined Zappa, and Zappa took him aside and said, "Get your own publishing company." Now, when you were 20, you were Jack Bruce, 22, Jeff Beck. Aside from getting your own publishing company, what was the best advice that was given to you, or even from your dad growing up, though, for that's really helped out you to get you where you are today?
Oh, wow. I think probably the best advice was just be good to people, be courteous, don't slag them off, because you're on your way up and one day you're going to be on your way down. And I thought that was always very interesting. I don't know, I mean, I didn't have people giving me advice particularly. I just watched and learned. I was also brought up in a very so both my mum were military. My mum was only during the war. They were both in the Second World War. My mum was in the army, my dad was in the RAF, so they had military backgrounds. My mum actually came from a long line of military family, so the house was run a bit like the army.
Gotcha.
So I had a lot of kind of discipline growing up, 50s, 60s schoolboy, short back and sides hair, and tie. And also I had a lot of musical discipline, which my dad was he was a very strict band leader. Brilliant, absolutely brilliant, but tough. So I think that really helped me be disciplined on sessions, and it helped me musically too, because I didn't go there and start doing loads of fills. I knew enough to just play what the track needed, and I would push the envelope. I would go, I wonder if I can get away with doing this. The producer would say, Simon, that's a little much, can you play simpler? But other times it would work because it was so different to what the artist or the producer had thought about doing with this song. So sometimes you've got to take those, you can't play it safe all the time, and I've never played safe. I've played disciplined, but not safe. There's two different things. So, but I think the in terms of actual advice, yeah, I'm sure there was. It's hard to remember, but I just learned from watching everybody else on the session, and knowing your place, and just and you slowly get to know people in the studios, you get to know the seconds, you get to know the engineers, tape ops, and and as long as you're just courteous and polite and respect everybody, that's the way to get on.
Great. Well, hey, Simon, we want to thank you at Jam so much for your time. We wish you much continued success, and we're really looking forward to when your next album comes out down the road.
Okay. Yeah, so am I.
Nice. Take care. All the best.